Thanks for having me, everyone. And this talk was originally presented, or a bulk of it, and it's evolved quite a bit in the last year. But the last time I spoke publicly in front of real people instead of virtually was at the RSA conference in 2020, late February 2020, and I was right before the COVID sort of scramble happened. And I actually, the talk is done in the style of a Pulp Fiction detective novel, and with this little more catchy title, The Impact of DevSecOps Quantified. And I'm gonna start off with a little corniness. So hopefully you guys can come off the mic and laugh at me, so I don't feel silly for doing the corniness without any feedback. It's sometimes hard to do comedy to a video recording. But imagine it's a dark room. Dick Tracy is sitting behind a desk, and the door opens. Her name was Big Data Analysis, and I knew she was trouble when she walked through my door, but I couldn't send her packing because she was just trying to help me out with my gal, the truth. You see, my gal, the truth, and we were going through a bit of a rough patch. I'd recently hooked up with a new crowd named DevSecOps, a well-meaning bunch, but there were a few guys in this crowd named Folklore and Anecdote and Intuition, and my gal, the truth, she wasn't always kind to these guys. So Big Data Analysis promised to help me out with that. She was going to show where my new friends were right. But that wasn't going to be good enough for my gal, the truth. She was also going to show where they were wrong. And that's where the trouble began. So stick around and I'll tell you our story. But if you're the type that doesn't like to have your beliefs challenged with data, then you better beat it, kid. Because my gal, the truth, she's a beauty, but she ain't always kind. Okay.
Awesome.
I feel okay doing it in front of a live audience, but not so great doing it on video. So thank you for that, for coming off the sound and giving me that. So I'm going to talk about data here, and Dave Tuman knows this better than me. I learned a lot of this from Dave and other folks I worked with during my SCI time. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. I'm going to show you mostly correlations today. We're going to talk a little bit about what I think is causal and what I don't, without a lot of evidence for that. And it's a relatively simplistic analysis for this first round for DevSecOps. The analysis for Lean Agile that Julia mentioned earlier is actually a lot more sophisticated. I actually had some help from the SCI folks to help validate that and make that statistically sound. Also, I'm going to talk about sort of practices that sort of show a correlation with good things. And that's not me saying you must adopt these practices. It's me saying that there's some evidence that they might be good in certain circumstances. You have to take your circumstances, your context into account before you decide whether or not to adopt them. So this is the money slide. This is the, in academia, you never give this slide until the very end, right? You set it up and caveat it, and you sort of build up, and then you give. But in the business world, people want to know the money slide right up front. This is basically to convince you to stick around for the rest of the talk. But this is a chart that shows very clearly that teams that adopt a lot of good engineering practices, DevSecOps practices, most of them having to do with security, but that build on regular engineering practices and DevOps practices, the teams that adopt those to a high degree have 85% lower risk outcomes by a pretty flawed measure, but it's good enough for the purposes of making the case here. Also, I do have this one little bit of statistics up here. The ANOVA p-value for this is very good. In order to publish academically, this has to be 0.05 or lower. This is almost an order of magnitude better than that. So it is a statistically sound correlation. So that's the end of the story. Let's go back to the beginning, and I'll fill you in on the rest of the story, kind of thing. Here, and this is my DevOps continuum loop that I was using for years to coach and consult on DevOps transformation. And when I got to Comcast, I basically went back to my old build security in stuff. I basically launched the build security in initiative with Nooper and Gary McGraw at the SEI, and I was still employed on the Carnegie Mellon side, so I wasn't an employee of the SEI, but I worked there and had an office there. And I tried to graft those on top of all the practices in that build security, on top of this continuum. And I was able to do that. And this became my sort of eye candy slide for a while there, short while, maybe only a few months when I got to Comcast. But I quickly realized that this was too much. It was not really very consumable. And we needed a way to sort of bring development teams along more gradually. And so I went back to my Agile days, and a framework that I had used to do big, large Agile transformations at places like Ford Motor Company and USAA had sort of a rough shape that I'll describe here in a second. And this is the shape that they had. And I realized that we could apply this to DevSecOps transformation. It's a three-part framework that sort of starts with ideas and concepts and language that will not offend, first of all, the group you're trying to influence. And then second of all, actually hook their brain, get them to sort of go, wow, this is different. I'm gonna lean forward on this. And then when you have their attention, you don't give them eye candy that, oh, they go like, where do I start? That's too much. You give them a very shallow path to improvement. And then the third part is you provide management visibility and goal setting. And I'm going to demo these last two. I'm going to talk for a few minutes on slides on this first one, and then I'm going to demo in live an application that we developed that we do all our coaching from, and we do our director level and manager level management visibility from. I'll demo that live. So I don't have time, to go into all of the sort of cultural and win the hearts and minds stuff. So I'm going to basically start with the most impactful one. And this is our pledge. We call this slide the pledge. It's a pledge from the security organization, the 400-person security organization that Nooper Davis leads at Comcast, to the engineering teams that are doing all the development work. First of all, it starts with the word trust. And this is hard because there's been a lot of lack of trust between security and developers. Security folks think developers are putting crap out there that's going to get us hacked, and developers think that the security people just don't understand how they do their job and are giving them unfunded mandates, and they can be safely ignored. And so there's a lack of trust. But we're going to start with the word trust. We trust, first of all, that you want to do the right thing, that engineering teams want to do the right thing. But we also, in giving you this trust, we have to allow you sometimes to make trade-off decisions that will accept some security risk for a while, at least, because you're trying to address other more important business risks. And the most important business risk is having a customer base, right? If you have no customers, who cares about security? So a lot of folks criticize Zoom for poor security, and security folks think they made bad business decisions. But the reality is that they won to a large degree the COVID wars. Yeah, the first month or so it was a rocky road for them because they had some major security problems, but they actually had the best user experience. And so they made the smart business decision. To hear a security person say that is sort of hard sometimes, but I honestly believe they made the right business decision to focus on user experience first. And even if that meant accepting some security risk, by all means, let's do it. But we're not going to leave you hanging out there. Well, first of all, we're going to pledge to help by providing you with information and advice so that those trade-off decisions are well-informed, and coaching so that you can understand what the right thing is. And we're going to get into that more in depth here. But more importantly, we're going to give you the easy button for the right thing. So we're going to make it so easy to do the right thing that it's actually the easiest thing to do. And that we have to work on that in the security world. In the past, the security folks have not done that well. They basically said, here's what you should do. Here's what the policy says, without actually giving them any good concrete guidance on how to do it, or even maybe tools that automatically do that, self-service tools or libraries. We're committed to doing it that way going forward. And we fundamentally understand that our role has changed. We're no longer gatekeepers. We're no longer the police. We're no longer auditors. Rather, we become toolsmiths and coaches. And that is the role we're moving into. And my team has been established that way from the get-go. The rest of Comcast Cybersecurity is coming along with that last line, and not quite there yet. Okay, so I said I would do live demo, and I need to go out of full screen mode for that. I need to tab over to my browser. So this is the tool we use to coach from. And so what we do is we sit down and meet with every development team every 90 days. And the first workshop we do with the development team is 90 minutes long, and we require that every member of the team be there. I mean, sickness and stuff, but not just the coders. We require anyone that's running their DevOps pipelines. We require the product people, and this is really the key thing, and the Scrum Masters to all be in the room, especially for the first workshop, and then they're of course welcome. We have less stringent rules for the follow-on workshops. We sit down with them and we show them the 47 things that are on that big infinity loop that I showed at the beginning, and we say, this is everything you could be doing, but we want you to start with these 6. We want you to get to culture for these 6 before we move on. And what we do is we walk through each of these 6 one at a time, and you don't need to read what those 6 are. That's not the point of this. The point of this is getting adoption. The content matters less. Any security team is going to be able to come up with the content for this. But let me give you an example of how this is worded here for them. Software composition analysis, or otherwise known as analysis for code included or open source security tools, is integrated into the pipeline and auto run on commit, merge, or cadence that is significantly shorter than the release cadence. This is essentially the policy statement reworded from the developer's perspective. And we ask them at this point, we're not saying, do you comply or not comply? We're saying, at what level of maturity are you in the adoption of this? And the maturity scale is completely different than what you're used to, CMM level 1 through 3, 4, 5. It starts off as unknown, meaning unassessed. We don't know what it is. We're not even going to talk about it today, maybe. That's why there's still some blue things left on this chart for people. 2 thoughts, meaning we've not put much thought into it yet. We're just starting to think about it. Maybe today's even the first time we've thought about it. Words, meaning we're making plans to adopt this practice. Actions, we're in the process. Maybe we've got it for 3 of our 5 apps. And culture, for every reasonable place where we could be doing this practice, we're doing it. And we wouldn't think of launching a new effort without this practice being fundamental and part of it. And so notice how this is all shades of green. It's not red, amber, green. It's not pass or fail. It is sort of shades of green. And this is a fundamental trick of getting people to be honest and open in the meeting. If you're gonna give them a red mark, they're not gonna tell you the truth. They're gonna tell you what they think you want to hear. And this helps to get away from that. And by the way, this is a cute acronym: thoughts, words, actions, culture is THWACK. So even though you're not thwacking them with red buttons or red boxes, we're using the THWACK acronym for this. So we keep expanding the ring. So this is the Spotlight 6, and then here is the Spotlight 6 plus the secondary 6. These are 12 now that are in scope. We keep expanding this ring of things that are in scope until we find a few things that they're not at culture for. And then we immediately switch over to this plan tab, and we ask them to put 1 to 3 items in their planned column for the next 90 days. And what they're doing by putting it in the planned column is they're making a commitment to turn this just 1 shade of green darker in the next 90 days. We don't give them credit for the thoughts to words one. As soon as we put it in this column, it's now words, because you're talking about adopting it. So it's already graduated to words in our mind. So we have a 93% success rate. Items that get put in this planned column, they do successfully turn 1 shade of green darker in the next 90 days. And the reason for this is that we don't just leave them after this 90-minute workshop. We put these items on our team's backlog, and our coaches, my team of coaches, are responsible for constantly following up with these folks those of you familiar with the TSP coaching model are probably very familiar with this. Constantly following up and helping the team to achieve their goals. It's their goals, but we're helping them to achieve their goals. So this is fundamentally very successful at getting people to adopt the practices. The thing that we do when we meet with development teams, leaders like managers, is we'll show them this radar that we have here. And so this is the showcase 6 plus the secondary 6. It's the 12 key practices, and it's just a view inside of Nooper's organization. You would expect the cybersecurity group to have adopted all the practices, but we haven't actually. And the reason I'm showing you this, not because we've only rolled this out to inside of our own development teams, we've actually rolled it out across 400 of 600 development teams at Comcast. It's just that I only have permission to show you our data. I don't have permission to show you data from all the product teams at Comcast. So I'm only showing you this data. And this visualization says we're doing really great with threat modeling and the privacy work. And we have work to do in all the other ones. And these two are the new ones that were added to the secondary 6 for 2021. And in 2020, there was a different set of focus items. And so we keep moving the goalposts on folks. So that's why even a lot of teams are unassessed yet, because we just haven't gotten back to the 90-day cycle with those teams yet, to giving them a chance to do it. We should be mostly through all of them by the end of this quarter, though, unless people put us off. So you can also drill down and you can sort of see where's my team in this. My development team here is this one right here. So even my team's not perfect. You know, you can drill down to this, and this is an interactive thing, so you can edit it. You can drill down and edit the values and all that sort of thing. So, so that's the coaching tool we use. And so I'm going to switch back to slides now and sort of show you sort of how we use that. Talk about more how we use that. These are slides for takeaway. They cover the same ground as what I just demoed. Okay, so back to this money slide. Before back to the slide, let me explain to you the research we did. So at the end of 2019, we had 195 teams onboarded to the program. It's over 400 now. And for 195 of those teams, we had accurate mapping to the outcomes data that I'm going to use here. Flawed outcomes data. I'm not saying it's the end all be all for outcomes data. So the sample size for this is 158 unique teams that we're doing the correlations on. And this is the money slide. And it basically says the exact same thing, except the y-axis, rather than be labeled generically risk, there's a more specific definition of what the y-axis is. And it's the mean CVSS weighted vulnerabilities for that group, the group that's in the low maturity, medium maturity, and high maturity groups. And this is the formula we use for that risk, that CVSS weighting here. We're taking the CVSS score. CVSS is a standard scoring mechanism that's in the industry for scoring the severity, the sort of badness of a vulnerability that's found. And it's on a scale from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. I'm not actually sure whether it starts at 0 or not. 10 being the absolute worst, like pants on fire, you know, blow up, we got to fix it immediately. And we're taking 2 to that power, and we're summing all that up. And so if someone has one CVSS 10 that's equal to 2 CVSS 9s, is equal to 4 CVSS 8s. So the 8s are half as risky as the 9s are half as risky as the 10s. And that there's some research that sort of shows this is a pretty reasonable scale. It's like a logarithmic scale, you'd call this, for things like decibels and stuff. And you know, the sound has to be twice as loud for you to notice a 10% difference in it. Twice as much power behind it for you to notice a 10% difference in it. And I'm actually going to skip through these next couple of slides here, but they're in there to sort of, I've said most of the stuff, they're in there as takeaways for the stuff that I've sort of said already here. And then the bottom line is, well, I'm going to skip past, is that you know, teams that adopt more of these practices have 85% lower risk on that with that limited risk outcome measure that we have, that CVSS weighting methods. This next section is kind of interesting because we wondered whether or not we should give people credit for getting to actions or even to words. And so when we redo the analysis, where we give 3 points for culture and 2 points for actions and 1 point for words and nothing for undefined, unknown, and nothing for thoughts, 0 for those, then the correlation falls apart, literally falls apart. The ANOVA goes from 0.008 to 0.8, which is 2 orders of magnitude worse. And the bottom line here is that you really have to get all the way to culture. Words are cheap, and even actions, if you claim you started on it, you generally haven't done enough of it for us really to get the value out of it. And you got to get all the way to the point where you're willing to say we're at culture for this before you really get the value out of it. And I think a lot of times the audit approach gives you a lot of credit for being almost there, and you really don't get the value to you. The tipping point is pretty far along in the maturity journey. And so now we don't give people credit for actions. We only give them credit for culture. So that's one interesting outcome out of this. Moving on to the actual impact of each of the practices, I have the RSA version of this talk is a full hour just focused sort of on this aspect of it. And I'm down to 12 minutes left before the QA, so I don't have time to dig into each item here. So I'm gonna just sort of give you the gist at the top level here. You guys are less interested in the specifics of the practice, I would guess, from this. But these are 8 of the practices that we thought would be valuable, and we have data that shows that if you do a pairwise correlation, not controlling for, not having all of them in the same correlation, a multi-regression, this is just a linear regression. Here's what the correlation is. And they're all very significant. They're all very high. They obviously go down when you control for each of them and you do a multi-regression. So the contribution of each individual one is not 65% plus 61% for the second and third rows. There is over 100%, risk reduction. That's impossible. So keep that in mind, that this is meant to be a pairwise a view here. I do have the multi-regression if you're interested, and I can show it to you. There's a couple of caveats I want you to go away with. This top line is obviously, in our opinion, biased towards the risk score. It happens to be very closely related. The teams that are getting that outcome score, the 158 out of 195, are the ones that are most likely to be doing this. This is basically, do you have a process for getting information and dealing with it from that external source, that same external source that all 158 teams had to in order to get into the data set. So this 73% is an exaggeration of the actual value. And then the secrets management one is an under exaggeration, clearly, because our outcome measure didn't look for things like password exposures and stuff. And so we think that if we did, that would be higher. So generally, don't pay attention to the volume, the magnitude of this correlation. These are all 8 things that we thought were good, and we have some evidence now that points to that they are good. So that's my gal, the truth, being happy with that my friends, my new DevSecOps friends were right, and big data analysis showing where they were right. But remember, my gal, the truth, she's not always happy with that. So she's going to need to show where they were wrong. So we're going to move on to a few places where we thought there would be a correlation and there wasn't. The first is sort of a bit of a red herring. We have this training called Security Yellow Belt, and it showed up with a 0% reduction in risk. Well, when we poked at it, nearly every team that we evaluated was at culture for this particular practice. And so if there was a difference between the teams that did and didn't, I mean, it would be so small that it wouldn't register here. So if this was anything but 0, that would have shown that our analysis was wrong, was flawed. The way we were doing the math was wrong. So I'm glad in the end this came out at 0, but we were not happy with it when we first saw it. So there's some validation thing. Here are 2 practices that we thought would correlate with a risk reduction that actually negatively correlated with risk reduction. The teams that were doing these 2 practices actually had worse security outcomes than the teams that weren't. And these are 2 of the key DevSecOps practices, right? Analysis for code written. This is SaaS and IaaS tools in your pipeline. Analysis for code imported. That's the one that we talked about in detail a little bit later, or a little bit earlier, I mean. Even bigger negative correlation with risk outcomes. So the thing is these 2 practices are prerequisites for these 2 other practices. And when you think about it for a second, all these 2 practices, to get culture for these 2 practices, you just have to get the scans running. You can be completely ignoring the scans. So we, of course, started with the worst case scenario teams, the ones that we thought were doing the worst job. We said, let's get the scans going for them. If those teams just got the scans going, they're like, yeah, we're done. We got the scans going. Yay, woo, whoopee. But they were the worst case scenario teams. It wasn't until they actually resolved the findings from those scans, got the initial set to 0, which is the most important one in this group, and then after that, put in place preventive measures so that they never let another vulnerability like the ones that are found in these scans ever get into their code base again. That's when the real value came. And so while these on their own are a net negative, they're prerequisites for these really good things, and so you need to do them. So this doesn't say don't do these things, but what this says is fundamentally change the way you roll out the program. I mean, this seems like an obvious thing, right? Don't just run scans. You got to resolve the findings from the scans in order to get any value out of it. But that's not the way we roll out scanning at large organizations. We tend to say, okay, we have a project plan. We're going to start scanning for all 200 teams by the end of the year, and here's the plan. We're going to do 50 in the first quarter, and da-da-da. I would say the better approach would be to start with 1 team and put all your energy into getting them the scans running, and then immediately help them to get to resolution of all the findings from those, and then move on to the next team. And of course, you can take slightly bigger batches than 1 team at a time. And then the other thing is start with scanning of 1 tool type, like the SCA tool type we think is a bigger bang for the buck. Start with that, and don't give those teams even access to the licenses for the SaaS scans until they've shown healthy resolution curves of the SCA findings. And this is a much better strategy. First of all, it saves money on licenses because they gradually get adopted instead of big bang millions of dollars to these tool vendors. And second of all, it actually puts the emphasis onto getting resolution. And you only have so many resources. If you spend them all on getting scanning going, you don't have any left to help with resolution. And so it's a much better way to roll this out. And then, so that's a big outcome from that learning. Okay, so I'm down to 6 minutes left.
Larry, I think you can go a little bit longer. Honestly, I think you've got much more than that, because so if you don't feel like you got to rush so much.
Okay. I meant to be over at 40 minutes after the hour.
Another 10.
We can go to 45, I guess, minutes after the hour. Give you enough time a little bit of time to do Q&A, and then enough time for you to do your business here. So, okay, so security greenbelt training. So we had a training program that was in the list. That now our secure coding training was highly correlated with positive outcomes, but our novice and the secure coding training is literally 2 to 3 hours of a war game with a developer, basically, developer against machine. And it's fun. Developers love doing it, and they get a lot out of it. They learn a lot out of it. But we have this novice level training that's 40 hours of video-based training, essentially. And it turns out this is a total waste of our energy. We put a lot of energy into standing this up. We paid a lot of licenses to put people through it, and the teams that went through it actually had had higher risk, had worse security outcomes. So we didn't like this. So we started poking at this really deeply. And we found a few things when we did that really sort of opened our eyes. First of all, in order to get the team to culture for this practice, they got to it by only having one team member get this novice level 40-hour plus training. We couldn't afford to send the whole team to 40 hours of training. So this was sort of the expectation here. When we went and asked the teams, well, why did you pick Joe to go to this training? They were like, well, to be perfectly honest with you, Joe's not very good at anything else, so we figured we would send him off to this. He was the only one we could afford to leave. Well, imagine that person gets training. How much influence is he going to have over the team when he comes back to the team afterwards? If he's the guy that wasn't very good at anything else secretly, so that indicates that the selection criteria for who we put into the program was obviously very flawed. The other thing that we found is that the teams that were already really good at security were like, that's novice level training. We already know what asymmetric encryption is. We already know. We don't want to bother anyone on our team with that. We're a great team. And so they selected out. And so there's a bias there. They selected themselves out of it. So that's really sort of the three sort of learnings from this. As a result of this, we're fundamentally rethinking the approach. We're de-emphasizing it. We're not pushing a lot of people into Greenbelt. We're shifting our focus to that 2 to 3 hours secure coding training. And the bottom line is that without this quantitative insight, we would have gone blindly forward with our training strategy, and we wouldn't have known. See, our gal of truth, she ain't always kind, but she's always truthful, right? It's in her name, right? And you learn only from the truth. You don't necessarily only learn from being a cheerleader for the things you think are good to do. So, okay, so how are we using this inside of Comcast? And so the next big project, what I showed you was a project called Greenhouse. And it's based on a platform I also built at Comcast I didn't talk about called Security Central. The next big thing that we're doing is we're using this sort of quantitative way. Think about what I showed you earlier. Greenhouse was all qualitative. How do you think you're doing? Are you at culture? Do you think you're at culture? Do you think you're at words for this? It's all qualitative. It's turned into numbers, but it starts off as qualitative. Well, we have quantitative insight for some of this, but it was all in different systems. So I'm basically pulled all those threads together into one platform called Security Central now. And I'm now actually coaching people with a WISC-rated gamification system. And let me see, I'm going to go do a live demo of that since we have time, and get out of full screen mode because it always causes me problems when I don't.
Is gamification a real word?
I don't know. Good question. This is what we call X Cyberscore. It's on our new Security Central platform. We only had 8 data streams coming into the system now. But we hopefully will have 10 shortly, like within a few months, and 12 by the end of the year. And there's maybe 20 different data streams we've got targeted for the future. And basically what we did is we sat down with the data stream owners and we said, do you think this day, we came together with a unified weighting. This threat modeling is the biggest indicator of risk, possibly, is what the threat modeling people would think. Well, it turns out that the Qualys one is the biggest indicator of risk. The Qualys data stream, it's a scanning tool that works on the wire, the network level. And so it's what the hackers see. So it's very similar to the way the hackers work. And so this got 26% of all the weighting. And so we weighted each of these 6 data streams. And then we do that weighting and we sum up all the points that they've earned versus the points they could earn, and that gives us 436 out of 1,000 points. And that puts Newper's own org, again, we do this for all of Comcast, but I'm using Newper's team's data, the CCS, the Comcast Cybersecurity team's own data to be that. That only puts us in the 84th percentile. There's 16% of teams that are actually doing better than us. And, when you compare it to her top level orgs, it's a little better. So we have the ability to sort of define the comparison set for the percentile. So this is compared to every score inside of the whole system. This is just compared to Newper's own peers at her level in the organization. And then they track it over time, and there's a little sort of text about what this all means and stuff. But this is where the magic happens. This is, rather than say to folks, yeah, the Qualys people meet with you and they say, hey, pay attention to our data, it's the most important. Then the threat modeling people meet with you and say, hey, pay attention to the threat modeling findings, it's the most important. And the cloud security people say, hey, this is the biggest indicator of risk, you really have to resolve these cloud findings. Rather than, you know, have a bunch of different people all say different things, this rolls it all up into one risk-weighted score. And the way it's sorted is the sum of these two columns is the weighting, and how good you do at that determines how many points you earn, and then what's left is the opportunity for improvement. And so this 167 and this 163, these are actually randomly generated data. So this is skewing Nuper's numbers unfairly here, because they're the two worst numbers for her orgs, and those are the two that are just here for demo purposes. That's because our legal didn't want us to be able to demo these two particular data streams. But they represent the biggest opportunity for improvement. You should maybe work on these first. Now you have to take into account how much effort it'll take to work on this. So rather than have 6 different groups come to you and harass you, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease be the algorithm that what gets worked on, this actually is a weighted priority system that shows them what to work on. And there's a lot more to this system. You can drill down to all the metrics. You can see sort of, who in your org is contributing. So these are the 18 teams under Nuper for the SCA, the analysis for code imported, third-party one we've been talking about. So my team is doing great. We're earning 89% of the points for her. But this team is earning 0, and this team is earning 0. Remember how I said you don't get credit for actions or words, right? So they don't get credit till they get to culture. And then their metric actually starts to come into play, the raw metric for how quickly they resolve those SCA findings. And so overall, Nuper's org is only getting a little over 50% of the points she could be for this particular thing. And so, someone like Nuper can go say, well, why the hell is this Vuln Central team only at words for this practice? This F1 team should be leading the charge, because, we're cybersecurity and we should be dogfooding our own stuff. And you sit right next to the team called DevSecOps Transformation. Why are you not adopted their tools yet? So, so this is the sort of conversations that are driven by this. They can also, we have a leaderboard for this, and the top 10 teams are on the leaderboard. And you can set an OKR, performance goal to get this up 100 points in the next quarter. The whole thing can be gamified, and everyone wants to be on the leaderboard. We have a separate leaderboard for most improved in the last 90 days than for the one with the top 10 scores. So we're driving it with games instead of cajoling and beating them over the head with a stick kind of stuff. So that is my real content. I'm going to go back to the slides here for a second and sort of wrap up a little bit. So I started with a little corniness, so I'm going to end with a little corniness, a little less corniness, maybe. So this is not actually a poem. It's a portion of a song that was not actually written by George Shultz, but it was composed for him by a friend of his for his birthday. And George Shultz, as some of you may recall, was a former secretary, the head of the Fed for the US, and then became Secretary of Treasury, and eventually became a Secretary of State under various different presidents. He's a quant guy, he's a numbers guy. And so this spoke directly to him and speaks directly to the message that we're trying to sort of send out today. A fact without a theory is like a ship without a sail. It's like a boat without a rudder. It's like a kite without a tail. A fact without a figure is a tragic final act. But one thing worse in this universe is a theory without a fact. We've been operating on theory for so long. We've been operating on intuition and folklore and anecdotes. It's time to upgrade our intuition to insight, replace our folklore with facts, and swap out our anecdotes for evidence. Thank you. That's my talk.